Hello, welcome to Happy Birthday, Henry. What are we doing having a birthday party for Henry? He's been dead for 25 years this year in 2021. But this is a special occasion. Henry knew how to celebrate. He loved to celebrate. And I came across something which I think really says something about birthdays. This is something Henry wrote. Birthdays need to be celebrated. I think it's more important to celebrate a birthday than a successful exam, a promotion, or a victory. Because to celebrate a birthday means to say to someone, thank you for being you. Celebrating a birthday is exalting life and being glad for it. On a birthday, we do not say, thanks for what you did, or said, or accomplished. No, we say, thank you for being born and being among us. All of us have that feeling about Henri Nouwen, and we're glad that he was born and that he left such a rich legacy. One of the sites that I enjoyed so much when I was researching my film, Journey of the Heart, The Life of Henri Nouwen, I love this little scene that came from L'Arche Daybreak. Henry was turning 60, and he was birthed as a clown at age 60. It was such a delightful scene that I thought I'd love to share it with people who have been Henry fans. And this whole hour is going to be full of memories and inspiration from people who were part of many celebrations in Henry's life. Right now, I want you to meet Gabrielle Earnshaw. Gabrielle was the archivist at the Henry J.M. Nouwen Archives and Research Center for 16 years. And then she became the archivist for the Henry J.M. Nouwen Legacy Trust and also our consultant. And Gabrielle's one of those people who knows so much about Henri Nouwen. I always love talking with her, and I thought it would be great for us to hear from her today. Gabrielle, welcome, and I'm so glad you'd be with us. Tell me a little bit about the world that Henri Nouwen was born into. What era was it? What was life like?
So Henri Nouwen was born, the auspicious day was January 24th, 1932. And a lot of people will hear the 1930s and they'll think depression. And another significant thing that Henri Nouwen was born into was growing unease in Europe because of German aggression. And it wasn't long. He was actually only 9 years old when the war started. The Germans actually invaded Holland. And so Henri Nouwen's early life was very shaped by these two realities. And then I think it's also important to reflect on what the Netherlands was like in the 1930s up to the war. It was a place that had, they called it the two silos. There was the two silos between the Protestants and the Catholics. And Henry's family were very pious Catholics. His mother attended Mass every day. And Henry would have been steeped in the Catholic tradition. Although there was this tumultuous aspect to the Netherlands at the time, he himself was born into a family that was very stable, very strong. His parents were very loving. They loved each other. They had a very strong relationship. And Henry was their first child, and he was doted upon and absolutely adored from the get-go.
It's interesting because it was a very cultured family, that I know, and I find that weaves itself into Henry's world because he loved the arts, and I think that came, from his mother and father and from a family that valued the arts. Gabrielle, there's lots that we could talk about, but there's so many things we're going to get into today. I think what I'd like to ask you about specifically is, it feels like to me, Henry loved to celebrate. Do you have some parts of his life that you would draw attention to, that you where you see that kind of celebrating or honoring an event?
The one that really stands out is a celebration that happened after his ordination in 1957. And of course, the ordination happened in the church. But after that, there was quite an elegant affair that happened. The women were wearing beautiful gowns out of silk. There was lush flowers festooned on these large banquet tables. Many people there, quite like a wedding celebration. And there's this wonderful photograph of Henry sitting between his parents, and they've all got a champagne glass, and it's just ultimately a really good snapshot of how he was brought up to celebrate, that he was taught how to celebrate, and it was in quite a grand manner. And then the other one that comes to mind is many years later, and it was actually the 25th anniversary of his ordination. And this time, he had just spent some time in Latin America and at the Abbey of the Genesee. And he invited probably over 100 people, as well as all of his family who traveled from Holland to be there. And there was another one of these it wasn't elegant this time, but it was very celebratory. There were skits, there were send-ups, there were there were wonderful speeches, and Henry was really touched by the entire event. And I was just reading a letter actually that he wrote to everyone who attended, and what I wanted to bring out there was that he thanked everyone for attending, and he was sending the letter to everyone so that they could stay in touch, because he wanted the community that had happened on that weekend for his ordination celebration to continue. And it showed how he saw celebration as a way of bringing people together, and then hopefully knitting together another new community of network of friends that could be with or without him, sort of networking amongst themselves. And the other thing he did after this ordination party is he, I guess people had given him some gifts, and some of them were monetary, and he ended up giving the money away and giving it to the shoe shiners in Lima, Peru. And I think this was also something that maybe we can learn from that as well, is that a celebration was something that he would use to form community. And then also, if there were gifts to be given and received, he also included others. And in this case, it was some of the children that he had met in Lima, Peru.
I'm so glad you agreed to join us. You have so much knowledge of Henry, and it's so rich. For those of you who are maybe familiar with Gabrielle's name, you'll know she was the editor of books like Love Henry, You Are the Beloved, some very beautiful selections of writings. The Love Henry book, by the way, is a book of letters. And then she also did a very important book called Following Jesus, Finding Our Way Home in an Age of Anxiety. These are 3 books that Gabrielle edited from original letters and writings by Henry. But the most recent book is a book that absolutely enchants me, because it gave me insights into Henry that I had not got from any other place. And I highly recommend it. It's Henri Nouwen and the Return of the Prodigal Son, The Making of a Spiritual Classic. And if you haven't read that one, I suggest you do. There'll be links for it on our website. But it gives you insights into parts of Henry's life that help us understand what was behind what was happening to him. There's so many parts of Henry's life, and in this brief hour, we're not going to touch all of them. But obviously, one of the places that broke him open in a unique way was when he came to L'Arche, and he began to have within his friendship circle people with developmental disabilities, and it broke Henry open in a new way. Can you tell me a little bit about what you learned about Henry during this time period?
I think the thing to remember is that when Henry moved to L'Arche, he had been at Harvard University, Harvard Divinity School, which he himself called a very competitive place. And it hadn't been a good fit for him. So he was feeling anxious and tired and stressed because he had already left Yale Divinity School prior to that. And he had left there not because he was tired or stressed, but because he thought maybe he wanted to be a Latin American missionary, or maybe he was called to be a Latin American missionary. And none of that had worked. And so he had gone back to Harvard Divinity School. He thought that maybe teaching would be it. And it also was, he could feel it. It just wasn't the place for him. And then this wonderful call from Jean Vanier, who said, maybe you can make a home at L'Arche. And I think this word home really just rang like a bell in Henri Nouwen's whole being. He was really tired and he really wanted a place to be safe and to belong. And that's what he found at L'Arche. And something about L'Arche, the way that L'Arche really encourages people to be vulnerable, allows people to be vulnerable, sees the gift in vulnerability. These were all in very aligned with everything Henri had been teaching up to that point. But here was a place where he was actually, as you say, cracked open because of his vulnerabilities.
Gabrielle, this is a perfect lead into our next guest. These are people who came to know Henri Nouwen at L'Arche Daybreak here in Canada. You may be wondering, what is L'Arche Daybreak? L'Arche Daybreak is a member of the International Federation of L'Arche, a global movement where people with and without intellectual disabilities share life together in mutually transformative relationships. People are drawn to this community from all over the world. In 1986, Henri Nouwen was called by this L'Arche Daybreak community to come and be their pastor. I'm happy to be joined today by Robert Morgan, Carl MacMillan, Clara Fraschetti Lorenzo Sforza-Cesarini, and by Laurie Vaanholt. Can you take a moment and share with us how you met Henri Nouwen?
When I first met Henri, he was just the man who lived down the street, and he was a exuberant, energetic, pretty intense man who was really my neighbor. I mean, more than anything else, he was my neighbor. Years as time went on, and I came to know that Henri was a well-known author that that many people sought out to connect with. It was different for me because it wasn't the Henri that I knew. But I did have the privilege of seeing, I think, what was the essence of what he wrote that touched so many people. I had the privilege of seeing that in action, So years later, I have picked up and read some of Henri's books, never from beginning to end. I mean, I picked them up and I've read pieces of them. And I will tell you that when I read them, I hear Henri's voice and I see him in my head standing, with the intensity that was with Henri, with the long fingers talking. I think I almost lean in a little bit because when you were talking to Henri, he was always kind of leaning in to the conversation. So yeah, that's what Henri's books mean to me today. They're a way to just for a moment pause and to be able to bring myself to that place where I hear his voice, and I'm back in that place of living what it was that he was writing about.
I probably had heard of Henri. I was not familiar with the Catholic Church when I got involved with L'Arche, and I lived for 4 years with the L'Arche community in Winnipeg. And when I came back to Toronto, was very good friends with many of the members of Daybreak. So there was word out that this fellow named Henri Nouwen, no one called him father. He was, which was interesting because paternity was important for Henri, but his paternity was much more brotherly. And certainly when I met him, because I heard there was this he was anything wanting to be but big, but he was well known. And coming not just to visit Daybreak, but coming to live. So I'd heard about, I think I'd heard that name. And it was a big deal that he was coming to live there. And I think the first time I met him, he brought some of the core members to a show I was doing in the Poor Alex Theatre in downtown Toronto. This lovely grovelly theatre that he brought core members to more than once. So I met him kind of through my work and then through Daybreak.
So Henri, I was always struck by, I think Henri, even though he was this well-known international kind of writer and celebrity in a sense in some circles, Henry really just longed for the relationships with our folks, because they reminded Henry that who he wasn't about his celebrity status or about how many books he'd written or how well known he was. Our folks really couldn't care less how many books he'd written, because probably many of them wouldn't have read them. But they just knew Henry as one of us, as one of our community members. And that's why he made this place home. And I think it really grounded him. And it was hard to miss Henry, because Henry was notorious for his driving. And so he would whip up and down the laneway in his little blue Mazda. And he often would often also lend it out to people. So I remember borrowing his car on a couple of occasions. And I think the other time that was significant was I did a little retreat with Henry and Sue Mosteller. And it was a beautiful retreat based on his Return of the Prodigal Son book, and it was quite a powerful passage for me as a person of faith, for sure.
I love the bit about the car. I've heard others say that, when they say, will Henry ever be sainted? And they said probably the people who rode with him might be, because they survived. I don't know.
It's true.
Well, I had this experience when I was making the documentary Journey of the Heart, The Life of Henri Nouwen. I came across this wonderful footage from a birthday party at L'Arche Daybreak, which was thrown for Henry in his honor. He was turning 60. And in the midst of this birthday party is this wonderful event where he is born as a clown. And I just thought it was so delightful. I thought everybody would enjoy seeing it. Tell me a little bit about how that came about, and describe what was going on.
So when Henry turned 60, then there was a celebration at the meeting hall.
What I want us to do is I want all of us, when I count to 3, to say, Henry is a, and then I'm going to turn the microphone over to John, and he's going to say the 2 very difficult words that Henry is going to hear tonight. Ready, John? 1, 2, 3. Henry.
And the community and a few other people just came together to celebrate his birthday. And his good friend, Robert Morgan, was invited to help Henry to be reborn as a clown.
I think we should try to help Henry birth himself into his perhaps new role as a clown. So that's what I've been asked to do. And are you willing to go along with this? Can we help birth you into becoming a clown?
Yeah, I'm willing.
Henry was pretty playful. And so, he arrived at this birthday party celebration, and to discover that all of these people were gathered together to celebrate his birthday, and that part of what he was going to be led through was sort of this journey of being born into baby Henry the Clown.
It certainly wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't something Henry and I worked on. It was a complete surprise to him. And I knew that Henry was a natural at improvising. And he just naturally fell into the role of discovering the world for the first time and learning to speak. Now, Henry, I have to ask you to do some things now for us, okay? We used to have chickens on the farm here. Yeah? This is an egg. But a little baby chick won't come out, a baby clown will come out of this egg, okay? So you are going to come inside this, and you have to realize that when you're in there, do you know the passage about being knitted in your mother's womb? That's what's going to happen to you inside this egg. You're going to be knitted together like a baby clown.
And it was a very symbolic thing, because it was the very beginning of daybreak for him. And so maybe it's like, a new birth of in his life, of something, a newfound place. Because he really longed for a home and for a place that he could call home, where he could really, let go, and be himself.
We saw Henry breaking out of this giant sack that apparently was supposed to be an egg.
And at one point, his he sticks his foot out the top, and as people laugh, then he starts to shake his foot and to do all of these things. And Henry was it was often a thing at any sort of celebration, including at the Mass, that Henry was so expressive with his body, but he didn't have really good spatial awareness. So you were always kind of trying to protect, Henry from setting himself on fire, on a candle on the altar, or falling off the edge of a stage. And so with this being born in the egg, the egg is kind of bouncing on the floor because Henry's coming out of it, and really sort of acting the part. And, I have these memories of his face, coming up, and he had the big long fingers and the big long hands, and coming out, and just this look of like childlike wonder about coming out of this.
Oh, he likes that.
And it was magical. It was such a sweet, it was almost, you saw the child in Henry. Of course, we were all kind of amazed that this, again, celebrity status man who has made his home with us just had such a playful spirit and was willing to and wanting to celebrate his life in this way with us.
He just completely committed himself to the task at hand, which was to be born and discover his body, discover gravity, and very quickly he invited the children in to assist with his, so I think it was walking,
And teach him to say Aurora.
I was delighted to remember the struggle he had with Aurora, which was a running gag at the time. That was where Daybreak was, or Aurora was the town just north, Aurora. But of course, Henry, it was Aurora. So trying to teach Henry to speak, I got him to say, roar, roar, ah. And when he put it all together, he got Aurora. So anyway, but he was just great. We just had a wonderful time. And, he certainly knows how to play to a crowd.
I think that's what captured my imagination. When I saw that video, I was so touched by it. And it surprised me. There was no rehearsing for this. This was Henry just grabbing the moment and understanding it, and in a very whimsical way entering into it. And I think Henry had a wonderful gift for wonder and for play.
To play like that with Henry was a joy. This theologian, this master professorial theologian, could play like a fool, and loved it.
Yes, he did know how to play to a crowd, didn't he? That was such a delightful episode. From your perspective, what else happened that night? How did everybody respond?
Well, when I say play to a crowd, that was his crowd. It was at a time, I'm not sure chronologically where it was in terms of Henry's commitment to Daybreak. But one of the things that came out in that little improvisation was, as he was discovering the world, the last thing he discovered were the people. And together it was, Henry, these are your people. They love you. And you love them. You love them. We just collapsed together at that point. It was true, And so when I say play to the crowd, he was playing to his people and acknowledging them as such, I think,
Well, there's a childlike quality in Henry, a wonder in him. And you're right to put it alongside theologian and writer and, terribly intelligent man. But play becomes so much more possible when you trust the people around you. How do you think Henry felt about that community.
It brought him such joy to be able to be in relationship and to be able to begin to speak with complete candor about woundedness. Because it wasn't just his woundedness, and it wasn't just others' woundedness. I suppose the cliche would be that you see the wounds in others to open up your own. And gosh, if you want woundedness, come to L'Arche, see the wounds. And Henri did. It changed him, yeah.
For those of you who know this song, please sing with me.
Right, Robert sang the song Forever Young. And he sang the song Forever Young to Henri. And Henri sat, with that expression, just listening. And it was not just Robert singing, the rest of us were kind of singing in the background as well. And I have this really strong memory of when the song ended, Robert sang to Henri, "Happy birthday, happy Henri." And looking at Henri and realizing he really looks happy. Sometimes the places that were a bit of a struggle were if Henri didn't really feel like you had time for him or if you belonged. And I remember thinking, this is really successful because Henri, Henri knows that he's loved, that he's loved here amongst this group of people.
There was another event, another celebration. It was L'Arche's 25th anniversary, and the whole team took on the Winter Garden Theatre, probably one of the most beautiful theatres in Toronto, and put on a show. Tell me about that, and tell me about Henri's part in that.
So Robert Morgan, who animated Henri's birthday celebration, he and his partner in a theater company were engaged to help us to tell this story through theater.
Hi, my name is Angelique. This is my acting company.
And it was written through telling our stories together. And Henri was part of that. He was involved in the telling of the stories in the same way as any other member in the community, right? And somewhere along the line, it was decided that Henri and Sue Mosteller, and for me, I always think of Henri and Sue together. They were very, very different, but when I first came to Daybreak, they lived in the house next to each other. They had this extraordinary friendship.
Henri and Sue Mosteller came in riding horses. They'd been out in the long, lonesome trail, maybe for a little too long. These were two tired cowpokes.
Riding in on their stuffed horses, singing the song "Bound to Fail," but not bound by failure.
Oh no, we have two tired looking. This is Sue Mosteller, Henri Nouwen. They look like they've been on the trail too long, folks.
As we walk that slippery road,
With holes and bumps and mud,
we wonder if we ever will
escape the desperate run.
failure our destiny.
Road to a lonely grave.
But in spite of all our misery, we have survived.
'Cause we know a secret. Bound to fail. Bound to fail.
I will also tell you that I was more than a little bit terrified, as I think were most people, with the idea that Henri was going to dance and sing and coordinate all of these things at the very edge. Like, it was really, I don't know what they were thinking, but at the very edge of the stage on the Winter Garden Theatre. And I have this really strong memory of during the one rehearsal, and Henri always wanted to do things like just so, show me again. And so he was standing during a rehearsal, and we all had these X's that we were supposed to stand on, and Henry can't find his X, and there's all of those sorts of things going on, and he's got the horse, and he's trying to make the horse work right, and he's trying to sing the song, and he's trying to do all of these sorts of things. And during that one section of the rehearsal, I happened to be sitting with Russell, who was our stage manager, in the front watching this happen. And Russell turned to me and he said, "He's going to fall off the stage." And I said, "Yeah." And we just kind of, like, we would have expected it, right? Like, we would have expected him, because he was just so into it, And one of the great miracles of the Winter Garden performance was that somehow we're still not, I was part of it, and I still can't believe it happened. Somehow something was just given in those 2 nights where the story was told. People were able to tell the story in the way that it was able to be received. Henry's performance was extraordinary, as was Sue's. And I think part of it was he just gave up, trying to hit every mark, and just got into the moment.
But the theme of that moment, we're bound to fail, yet we're not bound by failure. And it may have been Henry, because we involved everybody in the creation of this thing. There's a secret. The secret is we're going to fail, folks, but that's not going to hold us back.
Because we know a secret.
We're going to keep dancing. We're going to keep celebrating. We're going to keep suffering. We're going to keep making mistakes. We're going to keep doing it all, the whole mess of it. And that was a moment that I think Sue Mosteller must really be congratulated for her highly choreographed dance steps.
Henry unabashedly talked about his own stuff, and I think that's part of why people really loved it, because he always talked about things that were hard and things that were difficult for people to talk about, but he went there. And this song, which was all about failure, ended up just being triumphant. And of course, everybody recognizes this, because we're all, if we haven't failed, we're afraid we will. And everyone identifies with that. So it was a very unlikely hit, but it was a very beloved moment in the show.
He did not fall off the stage. I'm very proud to say he did not fall off the stage.
To our audiences around the world right now, I think seeing this is gives you an aspect of Henri Nouwen that is so delightful, so absolutely delightful and true to him. Very genuine. Now, there was another interesting aspect that I learned from you and from the others. It was what Henry brought in the way of blessing, what it meant to bless somebody on their birthday or bless people. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
At significant moments in people's lives, when they're coming, when they're leaving the community, on their birthdays, at their baptism, just any sort of event in the community, if they're going away for a while, those sorts of things, then we bless people. And so the blessing means pulling the community together, and either passing a candle from person to person so they can tell the person who's receiving the blessing what they appreciate about that person, how they have been blessed by knowing them, and then sending them forward with that blessing as well. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Henry is the way in which he would find the way for each person to receive that blessing, knowing that it wasn't the same for each person. I think when I think about that, I think especially of a woman who's a member of our community who is Jewish, and what was important to her was to receive a sticker that was a symbol. You know, it wasn't just any sticker. It was a sticker that had been selected and that had been chosen and that represented her faith and her being a woman of faith. And so when the blessing was happening in our community, Henri would always make sure that that sticker was present and that he would give it to her. And if you didn't give it to her, she would be really hurt. She would be very, very hurt, in the same way that, if Henri didn't feel as though he was welcomed or acknowledged, he would be very hurt. That would be her experience as well. And I don't ever remember a time when Henri didn't make sure that that sticker was there and that he gave her that sticker. Other people might forget. I probably forgot, at times myself, but there was an attentiveness to that, and an attentiveness to making sure that each person received the blessing in the way that they most longed to be blessed, or that it meant the most to them. It also connects with the idea of being called by name, and being known in your community. And that's, that continues to be a big part of who we are.
We've touched on Henri's 60th birthday party and his memorable performance at the Winter Garden Theatre for the 25th Gala celebration of Daybreak. And we've even drawn attention to his gift for blessing others. I want to end this hour with Henri's love of celebrating the Eucharist. Many of you know this as the communion service. It's the time when Christians gather to receive the bread and the wine and to remember Jesus' suffering for them. It was a very important aspect of Henri's priestly duties, and wherever he was, he loved to celebrate the Eucharist every single day. Carl, let's start with you. What do you remember about Henri celebrating the Eucharist?
Of course, Henri, as a priest, recognized the value of celebration, recognized the value of lifting up a moment, or lifting up a person, or lifting up an occasion. So he knew how to do that in terms of preparing the space, and he would think a lot beforehand around, if it was a gathering, for example, in the chapel, he would think about how to arrange the chairs, how to bring in flowers and decoration, where to put the icons. So he very carefully thought through everything about how it would look and how it would invite people in. And then as people arrived, he connected with people. He said hello to people. He made them very welcome, and he let them know that he was really glad that they were there and that they had a place there. And so people entered a place of celebration and they felt connected. And then all that in place, it set the stage for things to happen.
Henri celebrated Eucharist in a way I'd never experienced before. He was animated. He brought the experience of sacrament alive and made it relevant to our daily life. And I think that meant so much to many people, especially folks who maybe had been disenfranchised from the church. He found a way to bring people back in again in a way that was meaningful and healing, I'd say, for lots of people. And he empowered core members to be part of the experience. So he had core members become Eucharistic ministers and did trainings with them, so that that they had a sense of calling to participate in the Eucharist, not just as a recipient, but as someone who is offering Eucharist to fellow community members. And people took it very seriously and were, I think, very empowered by that invitation.
Henri could pull out a chalice and some wafers and and do this Catholic mystery of bringing this mysterious mystery kind of Holy Spirit into our midst in a way that just meant it was at the heart of who Henri was, I think, So yes, for him to be able to, the priestly function, and it's okay, I think, to call it a function. It's not diminishing it in any way. It was his job. And he loved his job and he took it seriously and did it in all kinds of different ways. But bottom line, yeah, he was a priest.
Years later, I think I've come to realize that those mornings were where we kind of shared what it was that we were all living. It was a Eucharist, a celebration of the Eucharist, but the homily and the prayers were more of a conversation. And I wasn't raised Catholic. I didn't grow up Catholic. So much of what I learned and came to understand as being, the living reality of our faith, I really learned and came to understand through those moments, where we were gathered together in conversation about what we were living and how that connected to the broader faith community. And I think that remains for me one of the real gifts or treasures of having lived next door to and having known Henri. Being part of that ongoing conversation about where God is in all of our lives. And sometimes they weren't very easy conversations. Sometimes they were really hard conversations.
All of you have helped us to see the community Henri Nouwen strove to create, a safe place where you could have the ongoing conversations about where's God at work in our lives. I thank you so much for all you've shared. Have you got any last thoughts you would like to give us about what it was like to live with Henri in the intimacy of being under that microscope of shared community?
For me, it was like listening to a good Bob Dylan song in the 60s or the 70s or the 80s, right? It's like, hey, that's me, or not me, but that. So there was an authenticity and an intimacy to Henri's understanding of the world and understanding of himself that I think came from his love of other people and his focus on others, that in his writing, it's there. We're with him in a very personal way. So yeah, I don't know. He's had some gifts. That guy had some good gifts.
I think he called us out of ourselves as a community. I think he called us to be prophetic in the world and to speak our truth, to say that that relationships of mutuality amongst people who are all so very different is possible, and that we needed to announce that from the mountaintops. We needed to say that to the world, because he found that when he came to us, and we were kind of living in this cloistered little place, doing our own thing, and Henri arrived and said, man, you guys got to get this out there. This is incredible that this is happening here. And so I think he gave us the courage, really, to say we had something worthy to speak of. And so, yeah, I think we found our, I'd say courage.
The pastoring that he did, the relationships that he built and he facilitated between us, the way of celebrating each person in the moments of their birth, but also at their death, helping us to tell each other stories, that Henri wasn't alone in his ability to pull people together to do that, but he did it in a way that for all those of us who were really, privileged to live those days alongside him, it still influences so much of how we live. So much of what he really helped us to learn together about community, right? Like, that's the way I would put it. He was always helping us to learn together, and he had a particular gift in how he did that. It still influences us, and it still bears fruit, and many of us still draw on it. I know I do. I don't. In really significant moments of my life that have happened since Henri died, I have been both furious with him for being dead, because I would have really liked to have had those moments to have his wisdom in those moments, and at the same time, really grateful that I was able to live those moments in a particular way because of some of the lessons that he helped us to learn together.
I want to thank Gabrielle Earnshaw, and I'd also like to thank the folks from L'Arche Daybreak, Laurie, Clara, Robert, Lorenzo, and Carl, for bringing the rich reality of the friend they lived with very alive to us through their shared memories. I hope this webinar has been a reminder of some of the good things that you have found in Henri Nouwen's writing. As we have learned tonight, Henri didn't just write about these things, he lived them. This night of celebration begins a year for the Henri Nouwen Society, in which we want to commemorate the life of Henri Nouwen in a very special way. On March 24th, we're planning another webinar called My Dinner with Henri. You won't want to miss this. Parker Palmer and many of Henri's very good friends will join us for this inspiring evening of rich memories of Henri around the dinner table. I bet there's all sorts of stories they've got to tell about books being planned, ideas being argued. It's worth being there. You won't want to miss it. Make sure you go to our website to register for My Dinner with Henri. Then on June 4th and 5th, we are having an amazing conference called Henri Nouwen and the Art of Living. This conference will tackle some of the biggest questions we face today, and we have some wonderful, inspiring speakers lined up for this event. I'd like to close with these words by Henri Nouwen from his book, Life Signs. Celebration is not just a way to make people feel good for a while. It's a way in which faith in the God of life is lived out through both laughter and tears. Thus, celebration goes beyond ritual, custom, and tradition. It's the unceasing affirmation that underneath all the ups and downs of life, there flows a solid current of joy. I'm so glad so many of you have chosen to join us tonight from all around the world. If you've enjoyed this webinar, it will be available to you on our YouTube site, Henri Nouwen TV, or on our website, henrinouwen.org, and you will be able to see it again or share it with friends. We are glad Henri Nouwen was born, and I'm glad that you joined with us to celebrate.
The Holy Ground Rappers, you got it, coming! To pay tribute to Henri.
60 years ago in 1932, when God dropped down a gift for me and you, a living reminder from the Lord up above, join the Nouwen family, circle of love. Yes, what a very handsome
that he was the friend of the famous friend. That he's a Catholic punk and not a Baptist. Won't be long before we see a Thomas Martin dancing pretty. Henry, with his wife, didn't tell the kids he died.